Hey there, this is Promise Phelon, the Chief Growth Officer of the Growth Warrior Company. Welcome to our podcast called the Warrior Cast. Thanks everyone for being here today. I am going to be speaking with an incredibly interesting entrepreneur and warrior, Fred Latasa. He is the founder, the chef, the co-creator of Strangers and Saints restaurant in Cape Cod. We have a far-reaching conversation. You're going to love it. We go from his years running marketing for WebMD. We move into the decision to found his restaurant, how he runs that restaurant, and just some general ideas about how he sees business. It's a far-reaching conversation. There are some incredible nuggets, and I'm so excited that you're here to enjoy this with me. All right, jump in. Here we go.
It's a tavern-style atmosphere on the water here in Cape Cod, Provincetown, which sits out at the end of the world, basically. It's about 80 seats, so it's not small, but it's not really huge. It's Mediterranean in style, but nice. The most important thing for me and the team was to really bring something unique and really embrace hospitality. Create an environment where the customer could define the experience. I find so often you go into restaurants or any sort of business, and the business tells you what to do, and the business tries to tell you what your experience is going to be like. And I felt, well, that just seems wrong, in a world where people have lots of choices, certainly when they go out to eat. And why wouldn't you allow the customer, put the choices in terms of the customer? So, for example, in town, you need a reservation. You can't eat at the bar. You can only drink, or rather, if you're going to sit down, you have to eat and drink. There were all these rules. You have to. And I thought, well, that just seems odd. And so at the end of the day, it ended up just being a balance. But I think the thread through that was we were very tuned into the customer needs and how could we deliver something unique in this environment where there's a lot of competition that was that showed the customer that we cared. And then when as I mentioned, hospitality. I mean, anyone can take orders.
Right.
You can go to any place, and that's not a bad thing. But anticipating someone's needs and giving to them before they ask is hospitality.
Okay, I love everything you just said about hospitality and defining it as predicting, anticipating someone's needs. So I guess I have some kind of bigger picture questions. I mean, how does an executive in a multi-billion-dollar company that was listed, right? You guys had gone public. Now, you're building something completely from scratch. Literally,
right.
Like you built that building, or at least transformed that building into what it is today. And it's beautiful. So I guess what were the challenges that you thought you were going to face going from a corporate office and having a team and an assistant, and having all the kind of accoutrement of being an executive to actually, I imagine you've washed a couple dishes since you've been running Strangers and Saints.
I mean, there's a lot of similarities, actually. There's a lot of similarities. I mean, at the end of the day, it's business, right? It's just of a different size. And so we approached it like that. So as I said earlier, we spent a lot of time writing a business plan and really thinking out the experience and the product and the points of differentiation and who our audience was. And certainly in the restaurant industry, a lot of people on a smaller scale don't do that. And so we started off in a way that was sort of that reflected my past. But then going forward, one of the things that I could say the number one thing that I didn't really anticipate was staffing. So it was, I guess I had anticipated, it's going to be the food and developing the menu and the customer and this and that. And that was all sort of, I want to say straightforward, but it was sort of straightforward. It was easy to plan for it. You understood the playing field, right? You tested things, you tested recipes. There was sort of an approach to that. But what I didn't anticipate, so we have roughly about 40 employees over the summer. What I didn't anticipate was the variety of people. And just by the nature of the industry, it attracts all sorts of, well, one, we're in a resort town.
Right.
And it's a very transient place. And it's seasonal. So we're open 8 months out of the year. And, it's a restaurant. You have bartenders, barbacks, waiters. We're not in New York City or Boston or LA where you're pulling from actors and writers and people who are looking for second jobs. These are people who are here just to make a living. You begin to realize that people choose different paths, right?
So it's like their values are different than your values were.
Well, I mean, I guess, coming from an environment where, like WebMD, where we were attracting people from Harvard and Wharton and, and not to say that they're frankly more educated or less educated than someone who didn't go to college at all, but it's a different sort of perspective and value set that you bring, and accountability and background. And I still haven't quite put my finger on it, because I don't think I'm working with some really wonderful, smart, dedicated people who are accountable and never went to college, and never managed a business, but they have life skills and they know how to deal with people.
Right.
And I rely on them and trust them, and they're well read and they're smart. Right. I've worked at WebMD with, Wharton graduates who came on the scene and thought they were really smart and knew everything, and yet they hadn't really cut their teeth on much of anything.
So you're an SVP at a massive company that's like breaking down barriers. You guys were the first to really democratize content around health and wellness, the first. And now everyone, of course, is doing it. And there are a bunch of businesses that have grown as a result of what you paved. But now you're in a market that, restaurants are somewhat commoditized, right? It's a tight margin business. And so when you talk about managing talent in those two different environments, like, what have been some of the pleasant surprises? And what have been some of the things that have been sort of shocking to you?
I think at the core to it is that smaller businesses are like nickels and dimes, right? And larger businesses are, tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when you're dealing with nickels and dimes, and I don't mean that literally, but
figuratively,
but when you think of waste, or frankly, it doesn't matter what your small business is, if it's because it's labor cost,
right?
In our case, it's the cost of our goods, which are the food,
right?
Liquor, and how all that's managed. And so, an example I had to give to my staff was, people think nothing of if something gets burnt or broken, or, they eat something and it's not, it's only $1. And I'm like, well, if 40 people each waste $1 a day, and they work 6 days a week, and they work, you just start doing the math, and in a small business that can add up, to $5,000-$10,000. And that actually makes a difference. That's someone's salary for a couple of months. So, I having to put in, from a small business perspective, I had to be aware of everything, right? Every little, and put in checks and balances that you might not necessarily do at a multi-billion-dollar company. They exist, but that are at a higher level, right?
I want to point out two things. You're running a business that within 3 years is doing well over $1 million, 7 months out of the year. So that's incredible. And I think what you're talking about is a theme that a lot of small businesses try to deal with, which is, you and I talk about instincts a lot, right? Since I've been here, at least. And one of the things that you said, and you brought it up just now, is trying to get your employees to understand the economics of the business.
Right.
So when you think about transparency of information, like, how do you process that for your employees now?
Yeah, so it's funny, because as you were saying it, I was thinking about that, because I think that's, in a small business, I think giving your employees at any level complete transparency to the flow of the money, to transparency into your thinking, transparency into your challenges, I think is really important. And so, for example...
Say why.
Why?
Yeah.
Well, I can give you an example, which, because it's important, because you're all in the trenches together in a small business. It's not like you're all working together. And sometimes you'll say something or make a request or ask for something that seems they're like, why? And they want to push back. And so one day I said, you actually don't understand what happens in the course of a day. I get, in this case, notified by the town because of some ordinance that we've sort of challenged, or someone was this is going to sound silly, but someone was smoking outside and they set a fire to the moss on the thing. And so our building is over 200 years old. Someone put a cigarette out and on the side of the building and caught the building on fire. There's just all of these different aspects to running the business that are not transparent to the people who are there. And then you get into like the finances, or one day we broke down waste. We said, okay, let's just say everyone does. And there is, and in any business, you're going to plan, we plan for it. There's breakage, there's things just happen, right? And so, but people don't fully understand the implications of it. And to me, people help support what they help create. And so,
let me repeat that.
People help support what they help create. A former colleague and boss and mentor, Nan Forte, that she used to say it all the time, and it's like my mantra, because I feel like if the team is part of the creation of the product, and which is why you need to give them transparency, they're going to support it, right? Because they have skin in the game, right? So we train before every season. I have a week-long boot camp where we work with all of the staff. It doesn't matter who you are. And when we have challenges, or when we're going to introduce something new, or I usually bring the team together and let's talk about it. Like and sometimes they're the few that don't, they're people that just don't care, right? They're like, look, it's your business. I'm just here to make a paycheck and I'm going to go. And that's disappointing and frustrating, but that's just the reality, right? But there are some people who want to feel a part of something, and they want to feel that they're contributing, that they have ownership, and so you have to sort of tease those people out. And so by giving transparency, including them in the decision making, I mean, at the end of the day, I have to make the decision.
You're the decider.
Right. But if you build consensus, you give people transparency into what's going on. I mean, on a manager level, and we don't have that many managers, we have we meet once a week. I review all the financials, where we are to goal, where we were last year. Most of our employees actually appreciate that.
So it sounds like you have kind of three touchstones when it comes to transparency. So one is, and I love the boot camp. I want to come back to that. But it sounds like at the manager level, you go deep on causality, right? Like here's where we are, here's why we're here, here's what we have to change. So the managers are empowered with that data. And it sounds like at the employee level, you make the cost of certain decisions really clear to them and really personal to them. Like, here's how this affects you. And then it sounds like at a higher level, the boot camp is a way for you to almost, is that kind of like establishing the values? What's the agenda?
Right. No, it's that. So one of them is core values, just what you just said. So I make sure that they're clear what are our core values, right? Part of our core values is making sure we create an environment that's really positive for the employee. So I say to them usually at the beginning of every season that, and this is going to sound contrary to what I think other people would say, but who is the most important person in the food chain? It's not the customer. I tell them it's the employee. Because if you guys aren't happy, if the employees are not happy, then the customers are not going to have a good experience.
I don't think that's contrary. You've seen all the data that customer net promoter score is almost directly correlated with employee net promoter score. So where'd you learn that, number one? And number two, what do you think is the biggest contributor to you getting to this revenue in such a short period of time?
Okay, that was too much.
So the first question was, like, how'd you learn this?
Well, when we decided that we were going to really dive into this business, I did a lot of reading, and
but there are multiple things that I imagine you brought from the WebMD experience, because you were able to reflect and say, okay, what worked?
Yeah, that's a great. We used to have like town hall meeting every quarter. Our CEO at the time would come down, and they were pretty transparent. They let you know like where we were at a sales goal, what was sort of getting in the way, who was contributing, what new things were coming down the pike, how we were against the competitor. Everyone sort of left that meeting knowing like either one, everyone felt like, oh, I've got to go find more money, or we've got to go be faster on this product. It gave everyone felt like they were part of the product, which was WebMD. We were it wasn't just coming in and you can't create an atmosphere you feel like all your employees are coming in and punching in a time clock, so to speak, or just collecting a paycheck. If they don't feel invested, and the only way they're going to feel invested is if you sort of become transparent into, what you're doing. Let me give you, this is a different example outside of
I'm dying to hear it.
Yeah. So I'm also the president of the local business guild, and we recently had our annual meeting. And the agenda is always to review sort of the strategy and whatnot. And so I wrote, like I usually do, what I'm going to speak about, and it's like finance. It's all the different sort of usual categories that you would present to a membership organization. And I handed it out. I handed my notes out to everyone. And I said, you know what, I was literally said, I just want to be really transparent. I'm going to review where we're at, our strategy, our finances, and I've given you all of my notes because your member, they're paying dues. And so I said, I feel like I can't do this alone. I need all of your help.
So you enlisted them.
And I said, so I'm just going to be transparent to exactly where we are. And I laid out things in a very responsible, sort of organized way. And people came up afterwards and thanked me for being transparent.
Interesting. More
so than I even thought I was. Like, I think in general, employees or boards or people, they thirst for information. They want to know why, right? Especially in an environment today where you don't know where truth lies.
Amen.
Right? And so if you don't know where truth lies, then you're not going to trust, you're not going to invest, you're not going to go that extra. So if you're transparent and truthful with the information, certainly there's some things you have to, you can't share, but you can share pretty much 90% of things, and you certainly can share your thinking. And that proved to be really successful for that meeting. And then I see the same thing at the restaurant. Just being transparent. Just this is my goal. This is what we have to do. This is why I chose to do this. And
so you're transparent not only on the numbers, but the drivers and the why.
Oh.
And you talk about, like, I talked to one of to Kevin today or yesterday. We've been to the restaurant so many times since I've been here. And I asked him, I was like, well, so what do you recommend on the menu? And he's like, he's tasted everything.
Right.
And I said, wow, you take pride in testing all these things. He said, yeah, because every third conversation is, what do you recommend?
Right.
And so he's like, I want to be prepared to have those conversations with people. And so it sounds like he's enlisted because of that level of transparency. So in your mind, transparency in any kind of company is power. I guess the power to enlist and the power. But do you think it's the reason why you guys have done so incredibly well, not only like growth wise, but margin and reputation?
Well, so it's like a sort of a two-part. One, I think that the transparency in the environment and the shared values and practice what you preach, so I'm, walking the walk and talking the talk creates a solid and reliable workforce. So we've had a lot of repeat staff year to year. In a seasonal business, that's hard.
That's huge. Yeah.
And so I know just from the feedback I get that people like working with us. Even people that we've had to let go for one reason or other will come back and say, you know what, I just want you to know this has been a great experience. And I love, respect working for you guys. And so that ultimately will impact your product.
Yeah.
Impact your bottom line, because in two ways. One, with retention, right? It's less, it causes less waste, less training, less, right? So that you just from an employee perspective,
you're more efficient,
right? And they train, and so that's great. From how transparency impacted
your growth,
your growth. Well, so we do. From a train, I don't know if it's transparent, but we don't in our case, the product, knowledge of the product. So in this case, food, beverage, right? So everyone tastes everything, drinks everything. We talk about it. We have wine classes. I describe things to them. Because the more educated and knowledgeable and passionate they can be about the product, they can sell better, right? So, so you see that in sales, So, if they're confident, it's like you're going to buy a car. If someone's like doesn't like the car, they don't know anything about the car, you're not going to be really comfortable buying the car, right? But and 9 times out of 10, your customer says, "What do you like?" Just like you said earlier, and they want to know. And the worst thing in my environment was, well, I haven't tasted that.
I don't know.
Or I don't know. hey, what is, the pork chop like? Well, I've never eaten that. I'll give you, I was reading this in a book. Someone said, how's, the hanger steak? And the server says, well, you know what? I'm a vegetarian. I don't know. Well, that doesn't serve anyone, nor does the customer care that you're a vegetarian. So what I tell, and there's certainly
This is a
vegetarians,
great
right?
point.
So I say to the server, you know what? If someone says that, you say, you know what? That's actually, the pork chop is one of the chef's favorite dishes. Because they don't really care,
So you were saying, basically, it doesn't matter if you're a vegetarian. So how should that person respond?
Well, so they should be prepared. I mean, people are going to ask for all sorts of things, and the customer doesn't really care about you personally, right? What they want is a recommendation. So therefore, you should have in your arsenal of responses, because in that case, well, the pork chop is one of the chef's favorite dishes, or
here's why.
Oh, Billy, our bartender, the head bartender, loves he gets it every time for family meal. There are other ways you can. There are other ways. So it's like if you're using your car analogy. Well, how is that? Well, I don't really like that car, or I don't drive a stick, or I don't, or I don't like convertibles. They don't really care. So if you're going to sell it, you've got to in any business, there's a certain set of questions are going to come your way, right? How's the food? How's it dry?
Yes.
It's a car. So I train the staff to say, to have responses that actually facilitate a sale and also facilitate confidence.
So I feel like training and transparency has been the two major drivers for you having high repeat employees coming back, hence driving the growth of this business. So I guess, kind of wrapping up here, you've got people listening who are from different types of companies, all professional services. What's the one or two recommendations you would make to them as they're thinking about breaking through $1 million in revenue?
It's a great question. Well, what you just said is, you need to invest in your employees, and you need to listen to them and understand that they could be coming from all sorts of walks of life and backgrounds, and listen to your customers. But I'd say the biggest, probably the number one reason, if you will, that brought us to where we are today was that when we started, as I mentioned, we wrote a plan, and we were really clear.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
So we wrote it like a business financial plan, but I also wrote, what the customer experience was going to be like, what the products were going to be like. So in this case, it was food, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then what the experience in the actual restaurant was. And I was challenged by people in the industry that said, well, that's not how, that's not how you would set up a restaurant, because, they just were challenging based on, and I said, if I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail on my vision.
Okay, so I heard three things, and I think this is awesome, because the last point you made is what I observe about you. Is I feel when I watch you in the kitchen and I watch you prepare the menu, you have a high degree of trust in your own instincts.
Right.
And that's important as an entrepreneur. So I would say the three takeaways that I heard are, number one, trust, transparency, and training in the team. You got to invest.
Right.
And even if you're small, you got to find the resources and time to make that happen. The second piece I heard you talk about. So the three takeaways are, number one, training, trust, and transparency with your team. You got to invest. The second piece, I think, which really kind of comes to the fore. I mean, would you say that it is being accountable around the plan? Right.
Yeah,
so accountability.
Be accountable and staying true to it.
And staying true to the plan. And the third is, which I love and I experience, is that you trust yourself and you trust your instincts. And you're an artist and you're a creator and an entrepreneur, but you also really trust in what you bring to the table. And so I feel like those are the three things that have made you successful, not only as an executive and senior vice president at WebMD, but also as the owner and operator and visionary behind Strangers and Saints. So thank you, Fred.
Sure. You're welcome.
For spending this time with me and allowing me to drink your wine and eat your food. So I appreciate you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey guys, if you want to learn more about Fred Latasa, you can check him out at the Strangers and Saints website at www.strangersandsaints.com. Again, that's www.strangersandsaints.com, or they're on the Instagram at strangers_pt for Provincetown. and you can check them out there. Follow them on the Insta and on Facebook. All right. Hope all's well. Thanks again for you coming in, and look him up. Follow him. Take care.